Solid wood models were the primary type of scale models when I was a kid, 3/4 of a century ago. But there were other types of scale models. Flying scale models were one of these. While there are lots of reasons, aerodynamic, structural, etc., that expecting a scale model of an existing airplane to fly as well was unreasonable, we won't get into them here. If you were a kid, you would like your flying model to look like a P51 Mustang or a Spitfire, or at least like a real airplane you've seen down at the airport. A double dihedral high-wing boxy plane with an oversized propeller and very long springy wire landing gear just wasn't the same. Thus the flying model, even though it might be a contradiction in terms. One form of construction to accomplish this might have been called built-up construction. The airplane was built up of balsa sheet, balsa wood pieces, and stick and tissue, or stick and tissue. The Monogram Piper Cub illustrates this construction. You can see that it's built of 2 sheets of balsa wood for the size of the fuselage, and they're bent around formers down the middle that form the top view of the aircraft. The wing is solid balsa wood, but it's carved out and then covered with tissue over these ribs so that it isn't as heavy as a solid wood wing. The landing gear is spring steel wire, and it's trapped in the fuselage by 2 cross pieces such that it is more sturdy to survive landings. Airline, Comet, Cleveland, Guillows, Top Flight, and others made built-up models made entirely of sheet balsa wood. These produced some of the best because they were tough enough to last through more than one flight, and some of the worst, partially because they were both truly to scale and heavily constructed so that there was not enough power from a single loop of rubber band to cause them to actually fly. As time passed, styrene plastic parts were added, making the models more to scale, but even heavier. This is the Comet Tailorcraft, which is quite similar to the Piper Cub. You can see that it's entirely boxed with sheet balsa wood. The wing is actually hollow, but it's filled in with the balsa sheet so that it looks like it's made of 3/4 inch solid wood, which it's not. You can see from this photo that the Comet model is quite a bit smaller than the Speedybilt model, and being built out of the same 1/32 inch sheet stock, it's going to be a lot heavier for the smaller wing area, and therefore probably a poorer flyer. Here's an Airlane P51 kit. It is a sheet wood kit with areas covered with plain paper cut from the plans. Has a plastic propeller, but still has the paper bubble canopy I messed up every time. Here's the parts layout. Here are the plans showing the basic assembly and the parts for the fuselage cover and bubble canopy. Cleveland Luscombe 8A had to show up because I once was the proud owner of a real Luscombe 8A and I still miss it. These kits were good flying models. They were basically sheet balsa wood. Are the parts layout and the plans. Here's another Comet built-up flying scale model of the Fokker D8 World War I airplane. The plans show it also to be built up. The top part of the fuselage is covered by paper cut out of the plans, as you can see here and here. This should be a good flyer, except that its wing is held on only by balsa wood struts, which suggest it won't only fly once. Here's the box for a Piper Cub Super Cruiser kit, similar to the Tailorcraft. Here's a layout of the Comet Piper Cub kit parts. Here are the plans. Monogram produced a series of kits they called Speedy Built kits that were built up, but they also incorporated a little bit of stick and tissue construction in them. This is the box from the Piper Cub we saw earlier in the video. Most of the kits had this generic light plane looking propeller. This worked well for the first 4 kits, which were light planes, and several of the other kits that were also either light planes or had 2-bladed props, but it looked kind of funny on a Hellcat or a Mustang. These are what I might call generic instructions for building a Speedy Built kit. That this particular set came from the Piper Cub kit. The interesting thing to me is that this whole section here is how to prepare your airplane to fly. So it gives you how to set the weight and balance up, different ways to trim the airplane, and to change the trim if it doesn't fly correctly. Here's a parts layout for the Monogram long midget racing plane. Note that it comes with now a vacuum canopy, a lot more plastic details, a 1/3 of the plastic pilot. Here are the plans and assembly instructions. Here's the parts layout for the Monogram Corsair. Note that the plastic parts have become a whole lot more detailed. It has the vacuum-formed canopy, and the propeller is a 4-bladed prop that would be appropriate for a Corsair, but it probably isn't very appropriate for a flying model in that it has really thin blades and won't have much success pulling this fairly heavy model. This certainly was one of the most scale-looking airplanes, though, when it was built. Here are the plans for the Monogram Corsair. The assembly instructions have gotten a lot longer and run over onto the back of the page. The flying instructions have shrunk down to one single square at the very bottom. And every line has to have a P51 Mustang. The kit started out as light planes, which would be more likely to work as a flying model. But then they morphed into biplanes and ultimately ended up being mostly fighter planes. And at the very end, they produced, well, there was a Thunderjet in the middle, and at the very end, there were 2 jets. Thunderjet. And a Saberjet that they didn't even suggest that they would fly. Let's end our review of Monogram's Speedy Built models by looking at the plans for the P47 Thunderbolt Kit. I think it was the last propeller-driven kit. Produced a pretty good scale representation of the P47. Seems pretty amazing because it requires building a round fuselage that existed to house a round R2800 engine out of pieces of flat balsa sheet. The main landing gear was just glued on the bottom of the wings, as that were all of the fighter plane designs, because that's what the P47 design said they should be. He probably wouldn't have survived a good landing on any hard surface. The propeller was 4-bladed, but the blades were very thin in chord and to be scale. Probably they produced very little thrust. There were many plastic details, including little plastic rockets under the wings. I've commented annoyingly often that Speedy Built kits evolved from flying to scale. I'm sure Monogram scales would have shown that they had made the right decision. That's what we customers wanted. If the landing gear came off on the first flight, we'd patch up the torn tissue and fly the plane gear up After all, fighter planes usually flew gear up. If you trim the model well, the airplanes would glide okay, and who cares if the flight length depended more on the arm strength of the flyer than on the amount of turns on the rubber band. I and a lot of other kids thought these kids were great. Here's an ad showing Monogram Speedy-Built kits along with other Monogram offerings. Guillows also made flying scale models of built-up construction during this period of time. But in a kind of a reverse evolution move, Guillows also produced a line of display-only models using the built-up construction. The display kits used balsa sheet and paper cut from the plans and produced small-scale models. They came in the same size box, so a P40 and a B36 would be about the same size model to fit the box. Here's a very small sample of the number of kits they made shown on the back of this box. The good thing about them is they cost a quarter. Here's a parts and plan for the P47 model. The models produced fairly reasonable scale models considering their method of construction and, again, using flat sheets of plywood to try and build a round airplane. The central formers of the kit were built out of 1/8 inch balsa wood to give better support and less likelihood that they buckled during assembly. And the top part of the fuselage in this particular kit was carved from 1/8 inch to make it round. Here's a kit of the B-45, America's first jet bomber. Here's the parts layout and plans. Here are some of the models available in this line of kits. This shows 24. There were a lot more than that, though. Once went to a drugstore that had a display that was like 3 feet by 2 feet high, just of these boxes piled up. While these display models were quickly displaced by plastic scale models, I believe built-up flying scale models are still being made and are available for purchase. Speaking of evolution, the next big change in scale modeling was about to become underway.